Who is the mysterious woman checking up on the dead count?
What is she doing with that model?
Are you okay? Blink once for yes and twice for no.
These and other questions will be answered in this week's
It's Frenzy Frights.
Welcome to Frenzy Frights, a horror movie review show. My name is Gerry.
And I'm Chris.
And we are your hosts.
On Frenzy Frights, we're going to talk about horror movies, monster movies, creature features, and spook shows of all sorts.
Chris, what movie are we talking about today?
Thanks, Prof. We have a good one today. We're looking at Dracula's Daughter from 1936. This was directed by Lambert Hillier. For our writing credits, this was suggested by Oliver Jeffries. The treatment was done by John L. Balderson and Kurt Newman, contributing R.C. Sheriff Peter Dunn and Charles S. Belden. The screenplay itself was done by Garrett Ford. The story was done by John L. Balderson. This was based on Dracula's Guest, a 1914 story by Bram Stoker. This was produced by Universal Pictures. It was released on May 11th, 1936, and had a running time of 71 minutes.
Nice.
For our cast, we had Otto Kruger as Dr. Jeffrey Garth, Gloria Holden as Countess Marya Zaleska, Dracula's daughter, Marguerite Churchill as Janet Blake, Irving Pickle as Sandor, Halliwell Hobbs as Hawkins, Billy Bevan as Constable Albert, Nan Gray as Lily, and Hedda Hopper as Lady Esme Hammond. Gerry, can you give us a brief synopsis of this movie, and we will follow up with our thoughts.
You betcha. I wonder what that suggested by writing credit is. It's like, hey, why don't we do a movie about Dracula's daughter? That's a good suggestion, you know. Anyway, so I'm going to spoil Dracula's Daughter, and there's some trigger alerts for some kind of sexual assault implications. So we open with the Universal logo, which is a globe with a single prop plane circling it. Pretty good logo. Not my favorite yet, but it's coming. And the credits tell us that gowns are by Breimer, if you wanted to know. And FYI, Louise Breimer was a costume designer for Universal from 1933 to 37, and also did The Invisible Ray and Moonlight and Pretzels. So we are in for a treat, gown-wise anyway. So previously on Dracula, remember last week's show when Dr. Van Helsing staked Dracula? Well, someone called the cops because two idiot bobbies arrive in Carfax Abbey basement and wonder why Renfield is dead. Dr. Van Helsing says he didn't do it, but oh yeah, there is another body in the other room, and I did kill that guy. He gets arrested and needs someone to get him out of trouble. My only friend, Jeffrey Garth, can help my case. The problem is Jeffrey Garth isn't a lawyer, but he's a psychiatrist, and he only works for Krugerrands. But for an old pal like Dr. Van Helsing, he'll make an exception. So those idiot bobbies guard the bodies of Count Dracula and Renfield back at the Bobby house, and the more senior Bobby leaves the younger idiot one alone with the bodies. And he's visited by a mysterious, unblinking woman who hypnotizes him with her magic mood ring and makes off with Drac's bod. She takes it to a lonely place and burns it, killing any chance at a Lugosi sequel. And she's helped by her BFF, Sandor. Sandor has an unfortunate haircut and so must be bad. So Jeffrey Garth tries to help Dr. Van Helsing's murder case as best as he can. And he's assisted by his situationship gal Saturday, Janet Blake, who is also a baroness, but that hardly comes up. The sticking point is that Dr. Van Helsing wants to tell the truth about what happened, that he killed a dangerous vampire. This info must be brought to the scientific community, Van Helsing thinks. Garth isn't so sure. He doesn't really believe in the whole vampire biz, but he's going to help him anyway. At a party, Garth meets Countess Marya Zaleska, who is probably in town for the funeral of her father or something. Garth talks about how to get people over addiction. I'm not so sure his ideas are still in use by the medical community, but hey, it's 1936. They don't even believe in vampires yet. Zaleska is fascinated by Garth's theories on overcoming addiction and compulsion. And we find that she wants to be free from the world of night. Perhaps she can get over her vampire problems and live in the day, but her BFF Sandor discourages those ideas. Countess Z has a night out on the town and can't resist those vampiric feels, and she eats a guy. His death is noticed by the medical community, and they wonder why this guy is drained of blood, and he has punctures on his neck over his jugular vein. She asks Garth over to her place to talk about treatments for her undisclosed addiction, and he notices there aren't any mirrors around. That's weird, but whatever. He tells her she has to meet her addiction head on. Like with alcoholics, they make them sit alone with a drink. This is probably an awful idea, but we have a plot to get through, so here we are. After Garth leaves, she tells Sandor that, "Tonight I paint, and I will need a model." Yeah, we know what that means. He goes out and finds a young woman looking longingly over the edge of a bridge and brings her to Countess Z's Chelsea studios. The Chelsea girls have a moment before Countess Z bites her. The next day, she's found on the streets in a coma, and for some reason, Garth, the psychiatrist, is asked to examine her. He notes the blood loss, bites on the neck, and her murmurs about some strange woman. This kind of sort of sounds like all that vampire jazz Van Helsing has been going on about. Weird. They decide to give her some adrenaline to get her out of a coma, but maybe later because we have some plot points to hit first. Dr. Van Helsing doesn't understand. He killed Dracula, who was vampirizing London. Definitely someone with no mirrors in the house. Garth realizes Countess Z doesn't have any mirrors in her place. And Countess Z visits Garth's office, and she says his confront your addiction advice sucked, and she is going to leave London. She says she tried to resist, but couldn't. Garth wants her to admit what she has done, but "I can't tell you, it's too ghastly." Z wants Garth to come with her back home to Transylvania. "Yeah, no," he replies. So Z and Sandor kidnap Janet and say they're going to hurt her unless Garth moves to Castle Dracula. Now's a good time to bring that poor victim girl plot points up. So she's awake, kind of, and Garth hypnotizes her. She tells all about the studio in Chelsea above a bookshop, but then she dies. So much for the Hippocratic Oath, but it's all good. She's way down the cast list, and everybody knows the place she's talking about. Garth figures Countess Z is the vampire, and he and his pals go on a hunt for the Chelsea studio. He finds it and finds her, and she insists that he come to Transylvania so he can cure her from the curse of the Draculas. I love that. She admits, "I am Dracula's daughter." That's pretty badass. Scotland Yard puts the UK on lockdown to keep Z from heading back to Transylvania, and we cue a dragnet montage with Morse code and telephone wires all over the screen. There's a report of a plane leaving England, and Jeffrey follows on his own plane. Transylvania, a jolly old place full of dancing lederhosen ding-dongs who can finally live carefree lives now that the Draculas have moved. But a wolf howls in the distance, and a light appears at Castle Dracula window. "Drac's back. Everyone look busy." Jeffrey Garth arrives and gets an Uber to the Borgo Pass and makes his way to the castle. At the castle, Z tells Sandor she wants to change Garth into a vampire, but this ticks off Sandor, who's been promised to be turned into one himself. Kind of like Guillermo from What We Do in the Shadows. Garth approaches the castle, and Sandor misses him with some arrows. And he finds the Countess, who says she'll free Janet if he stays with her. Garth agrees, and Sandor shoots Countess Zaleska with an arrow, killing her. The Scotland Yard Expeditionary Force arrives at the castle with Dr. Van Helsing in tow and shoots Sandor before he can do more damage. Countess Z is dead, Janet's okay, romantic music plays as she and Garth embrace. We get a final shot of the still unblinking Countess Marya Zaleska, and the credits roll. Well, Chris, what did you think about Dracula's Daughter? Give us some info on this movie.
Thanks, Prof.
Yeah.
At the time of this recording, Dracula's Daughter is not on any streaming platform that I could find, nor is it on YouTube. It does air periodically on the Universal Monsters cable channel, and certain cable TV providers offer this as a $3.99 rental. It was released, as we said, on May 11th, 1936. Now, the purists and historians out there might know a little bit more about this movie than I do. I'm just going to cover some of the broader brushstrokes. For our cast, Dracula's Daughter was Gloria Holden's first starring role, playing the title character, and reportedly she was extremely displeased at having been assigned this role. Like many actors, Holden looked down on horror films. She had also seen Bela Lugosi struggle over the years since Dracula was made to free himself from typecasting, and feared that the role would lead to the same fate for her. Critic Mark Clark, though, says, ironically, Holden's disgust for the role may have led to the quality of her performance. Quote, her disdain for the part translates into a kind of self-loathing that perfectly suits her for the troubled character. She was age 32 at the time of this filming. Gloria Holden also played Mademoiselle Zola in the outstanding production winner biopic Life of Emile Zola, as well as her, quote, exotic depiction of the title role in Dracula's Daughter here. Her performance in the latter influenced the writings of horror novelist Anne Rice, and Dracula's Daughter is directly mentioned in Rice's novel The Queen of the Damned. Gloria Holden died in 1991 at age 87. Otto Kruger, as Garth, appeared in more than 120 film, television, and stage roles between 1915 and 1965, including Alfred Hitchcock's Saboteur and 4 episodes of Perry Mason. He lived to age 89 and passed away in 1974. Marguerite Churchill, who played Janet, had a career that spanned 30 years from 1922 to 1952. Marguerite made her debut as a child actress on Broadway in 1922. She debuted on screen in 1929 and appeared in more than 25 films. She frequently appeared in westerns such as Riders of the Purple Sage, and she was John Wayne's first leading lady in The Big Trail. She lived to age 89 and passed away in the year 2000. Edward Van Sloan reprised his role of Van Helsing, or Von Helsing, with a little bit of spelling there, and also appeared in Frankenstein and The Mummy. Irving Peichel as Sandor is an acclaimed actor and director. Nan Gray, who was Lily in this film, also appeared in The Invisible Man Returns. Hedda Hopper as Lady Esme may be better known for her career as a gossip columnist in the 1940s, 50s, and 1960s. She's the mother of actor William Hopper. Now, for our director, the film was directed by Lambert Hillier. Now, that unusual name looked familiar to me, and it rang a bell. He directed the first on-screen Batman on film, directing the 15-chapter serial in 1943. Hillier also directed The Invisible Ray with Boris Karloff and silent westerns with William S. Hart and Tom Mix, as well as early television, directing 40 episodes of The Cisco Kid. Now, early on, we see the corpse of Dracula, and this was a waxwork in the likeness of Bela Lugosi. Initially, Bela Lugosi and Jane Wyatt were set to star in the film. Universal also announced that Boris Karloff and Colin Clive, who starred together in Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, would appear, and that Cesar Romero, yes, the Joker, would play Dr. Garth. Moving on, per Wikipedia, Dracula's Daughter marked the first time the trend of lesbian vampirism was incorporated into a film that had been previously in literature. The lesbian implications of Dracula's Daughter were of great concern at the time to the Production Code Administration. PCA head Joseph Breen took special notice of the scene between the Countess and her model Lily, writing, quote, "This will need very careful handling to avoid any questionable flavor." The day before the scene was to be shot, Universal's Henry Zahner asked Breen to read a draft of the scene, and in response, Breen wrote, quote, "The present suggestion that Lily poses in the nude will be changed. She will be posing her neck and shoulders, and there will be no suggestion that she undresses, and there will be no exposure of her person." It was also stated that to the present incomplete sequence will be followed by a scene in which Lily is taken to a hospital, and there will definitely be established that she had been attacked by a vampire. The whole sequence will be treated in such a way as to avoid any suggestion of perverse sexual desire on the part of Myra or an attempted sexual attack upon Lily. Continuing, and from Wikipedia, the following. Gay film historian Vito Rosso noted in his book The Celluloid Closet that Universal highlighted Countess Zaleska's attraction to women in some of its original advertising for the film, using the tagline, quote, "Save the women of London from Dracula's daughter." He further cited Countess Zaleska as an example of the presentation of the, quote, "essence of homosexuality as a predatory weakness," unquote. Some reviewers of the day picked upon that and condemned the lesbian content, including the New York World Telegraph, which noted the Countess's tendency to wander around, quote, "giving the eye to sweet young girls," unquote. Other reviews missed it entirely, including the aforementioned New York Times, which advised, "be sure to bring the kiddies." Entertainment Weekly described the encounter between the Countess and Lily as, quote, "so hot, it's impossible to imagine how it ever got past 30's censors," whereas Time Out London finds only a, quote, "subtle suggestion of lesbianism." Horror scholar Skull notes that the scene has come to be seen as, quote, "classic lesbian sequence, although a decidedly negative stripe." The scene between Countess Zaleska and Lily was included in the 1995 documentary film adaptation of Russo's book. Another lesbian-tinged scene, which has received less critical attention, comes when the Countess is holding Janet captive, described as, quote, "the longest kiss never filmed." Countess Zaleska hovers lovingly over Janet, hovers and hovers, slowly descending to kiss the recumbent Janet until interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Garth. A 1998 article published by Bright Lights Film Journal said, quote, "Gloria Holden in the title role almost single-handedly redefined the 20s movie vamp as an impressive Euro-Butch Dyke bloodsucker," unquote, but draws an implicit comparison between Countess Zaleska's seeking to cure her vampirism through psychiatry and the former position of mainstream psychiatry of homosexuality as a mental illness. Zaleska's cruising the streets of London is seen parallel to cruising for sex, although that tends to be a male, quote, activity, and suggesting, quote, society's image of the lesbian soulless predator. But the conclusion is that, quote, Holden's striking mask-like face and haunting luminous eyes are the intoxicating essence of transgressive lesbian power, unquote. And there are thoughts and comments about the subject that Quentin Tarantino himself had about this film in the Hays Code, taking from an interview. And if you're very interested in that, you can find those on YouTube. Horror author Anne Rice has named Dracula's Daughter as a direct inspiration for her own homoerotic vampire fiction. She named the bar in the novel The Vampire Lestat Dracula's Daughter in honor of the film. And we should make this clear, being comic book fans, the title movie character is not to be confused with the Marvel Comics character, Dracula's daughter, Lilith Drake. Wow. Well, Prof, this is the time for our podcast where we both posit our initial reactions to watching this film. So I turn it to you. When you were watching Dracula's Daughter, what were you thinking as it was playing out?
All right. So first of all, I wanted to take a look at the vampire rules in this movie. Pretty similar to the Bela Lugosi Dracula. We don't get any fangs on the vampires. They don't cast a reflection in a mirror, which is a plot point. They can come out in nighttime only, so there's no daytime vampires like in Twins of Evil. They have a hypnotic power, especially with special jewelry, and that they're killed by a wooden stake in the heart, and arrows apparently qualify. When this movie opens, we get the kind of idiot Bobby trope. So, two British London Bobbies are trying to figure out what's going on. And one is an older, kind of more quote unquote mature idiot. And the other one is a younger, really dopey idiot. And I have to say, personally, I'm not a fan of that particular trope. And especially, I'm not a fan of comedy in the first minutes of a horror movie. And personally, I prefer kind of the Una O'Connor screaming kind of horror, comedy in a horror movie. But, here we are. We have some dumb bobbies. I know that this is going to probably come up later. She mentions, Countess Zaleska mentions that she never drinks wine, but it turns out she does drink tea. At least she pretends to. Now, overall, I didn't see this movie, Dracula's Daughter, really until probably, 15 years ago or so. And it's funny because as a kid, I was so desperate for more horror, particularly Universal horror. I really was like, anytime any Universal horror movie would come on, I would want to check it out. And I had no idea that this film existed. Now, remember, this is pre-internet, right? So, when I was a young kid, desperate for your Universal horror, I didn't have a website to look at because it was, 1972. And so I had no idea about this movie. So when I found it, and I don't know, maybe it was even on Svengoolie, I just fell in love with it. It's like the movie I wished I saw when I was a kid. So I really enjoy this movie, and it's kind of because of that, of that element that I didn't know about it until I was older. It feels like an exciting discovery, and I like that about it. So, Chris, what are some of your initial reactions of Dracula's Daughter?
Thanks, Prof. Some of the ones you mentioned were some of my favorite movie moments, so hopefully our wires don't get crossed too badly here. But my initial reactions were as follows. Right out of the gate, wow. Gloria Holden's eyes. Yeah, I can see how she was cast in this, and just mesmerizing and totally hypnotic in the literal sense. As I was watching her, I kind of got this vibe that she somewhat resembled Cher a little bit with the sound of the voice and just the stage presence that she commanded in this. And I noted some similarities with respect to that. I really like Marguerite Churchill. I really like how she played Janet. There was a boldness to this character. There was a playfulness to this character and a certain directness to it. I like the scene where she lied to the Countess and how that was sort of like dismissive. And with respect to them playing out the scene, I like we had a little bit of a confrontation between these two very, very strong independent women and how they're confronting each other. As I'm watching Marguerite Churchill, I couldn't help but wonder who she reminded me of. And she sort of had this vibe, which was sort of like an amalgam of Mary Tyler Moore and Sigourney Weaver, if you will, like a combination of these two actresses. It sort of gave off a whib and a vibe to me, and I just can't quite put my finger on it. But it was a very, very charming and great performance. Garth's character, I really wanted to like this guy, but he didn't seem to care too much about Janet in some key scenes. He was sort of dismissive of her. I think he treated her as a nuisance in some scenes, and I was a little bit disappointed by that. And he's somewhat aloof, and I really don't think he had an earnestness about his feelings for her until it was too late and she had been kidnapped. I kind of felt bad about that. And speaking of Garth, this guy sure got to Dracula's Castle fast and with relative ease, as opposed to these other Universal vampire movies that we've seen up to this point. There's always some hardship that people encounter with traveling to Transylvania, but not so much for him. And I wonder why he got off so easy. But at this point, we're kind of winding down to the end of the movie in the last 15 minutes, so we have to maybe perhaps not show it there.
He had a lot of airplane miles.
Yes, he must have. I think you're right. And as I was watching this, I knew you were going to put this in your notes, and I always defer to you, Professor, with regards to the quote vampire rules, because here we had Countess Zaleska, vampire, and she's handling a crucifix with not any harm. Her father was Count Dracula, also a vampire, but he couldn't even come near a crucifix in the previous Universal Dracula movie. Now, she does turn her face away from the cross as she holds it with her arm outstretched, clawing some revulsion to this object, though. So I'm glad that you put in the vampire rules for this film. I always defer to you when it comes to respect to that topic, and I'm so glad you nailed it and clarified. And this leads us to our podcast moment where we talk about our favorite movie moments. So, Prof, I'll take a step back, let you take the floor. What were some of your favorite moments of this film?
Well, this is a good segue because one of my favorite moments was that funeral scene where Countess Z burns Dracula. And she really does a thorough job. She not only does she burn him, but she throws salt on him, right? She salts the earth, right? And then she has this business with the crucifix that you just mentioned. And she looks away from it. And Sandor also, and I find this really interesting. Sandor also had to look away from it. And Sandor, as we find out later, is not a vampire. So he's just really cosplaying this. And he's taken it to the nth degree. But I thought that whole scene was really, really powerful, seeing, Lugosi get burned there. There's also another scene between her and Sandor where Countess Zaleska is playing piano, and she's like thinking, "Oh, I'm going to be able to get over my vampirism." And she's trying to play beautiful music, and she's talking about the sun and the wind in the trees and the flapping of birds' wings. But Sandor says, "Those flapping wings aren't birds, they're bats. And the shadows are getting long because night is coming." And the music is like getting more and more like, bizarre. And we see this again in another movie later. When we get to that movie, we'll talk about it and talk about these two scenes together. But I think this is an interesting thing. Now, Sandor and Zaleska, they have a very unhealthy relationship, right? He wants to be a vampire. For some reason, she's, slow jamming him. It's like Guillermo and What We Do in the Shadows. And he's just like really twisted about this stuff. Now, I also like, there's a little bit with Garth and Janet, and there's a bit that kind of recurs a couple of times with the tie. And he doesn't know how to tie his bow tie, and she does. And the relationship between these two is really weird. Whereas they're obviously very close and have a very tight intimacy, but they also bicker all the time. While they're having one of their fights, he needs to get his tie tied, and she does a terrible job of it, and he has to go to see Madame Z with this wanky tie, and it's kind of a bit throughout the whole thing. And then it happens again where she ties his tie, and it really is just emblematic of their relationship and their kind of very strange romantic relationship. And the last thing, one of my favorite moments is when Countess Z says, "I have the curse of the Draculas." And I never heard that. This is the only time I've heard vampirism called the curse of the Draculas. And I just loved it. It was fantastic. So, Chris, how about you? What are some of your favorite movie moments?
Thanks, Prof. Unintentionally, I'm circling back to a couple of things you said, but nonetheless, here I am. I loved it when Zaleska said the classic line, "I don't drink wine," and it just put a smile to my face instantly, and I just loved how it was delivered. It was just a bit of joy just rang through me, and I can't describe it, but I love the line. Prof, you call it the idiot Bobby trope. That put a smile on my face. For me, I'm calling it the incompetent Cockney constable alert, and that's
yeah.
so. And I, like you said, Prof, this was right out of the gate, and I didn't expect the comedy relief, if we were going to see any in this film, to happen so early on the onset. I mean, they played it as they were supposed to play it, but it really kind of eliminated what horror there could be coming up ahead, and some foreshadowing here. But if we had to get it out of the way early, we got it out of the way early. Yeah. But speaking of humor, there was a great moment. Was this the earliest prank call that we ever had on film? I mean, Janet does this prank call on Garth, and it is just brilliantly executed, where she gets into character and changes her voice to do a prank call on Garth. And my head was spinning. I didn't know they had prank calls going on that early since the invention of the telephone, practically. But this might be the earliest prank call that I can ever recall ever seeing it on film. And the way she does it is just masterful. And I like how she gets into character and just really fools Garth. So when a real call comes in, he thinks it's Janet playing a prank again. It's more comedy relief, but I think it really kind of defines these characters. And it put a smile on my face with that. Wow. Whoever thought to design Sandor's look, props, applause, chef's kiss. Sandor really looks menacing and creepy in this thing, and I think it's sort of the grotesque henchman standard that's going to be set and put forth going forward, because, boy, this was a really, really creepy look in this. As this was a sequel, I'm glad we mentioned the old Borgo Pass, but, boy, the village sure looked different to me, so I don't know if anybody did any continuity with respect to looking at Borgo Pass. Some of the things looked a little similar, but a lot of the villagers' clothes in the setting looked kind of different to me. But nonetheless, still, the fear of the mention of Dracula exists amongst the dwellers, and I like that. And just people gasping, and how look, there's a light in the castle, Dracula, and all the village is screaming, and I like that. One of the things I put in this spot in my notes was not necessarily something as a quote unquote favorite movie moment, but there is a lot of violence off screen and just things setting up, and just quickly the camera pans away and we're led to have our imagination think of what happens next. And there were so many scenes where that happened, and I was just kind of dying for, just give us a little taste. But then I'm remembering of the year and the time, and we really don't get that. So for what they were limited to do and what they were limited to show, and there was a lot of it. I mean, a lot of it. They really had to pull back, and they executed it such as it was. One of the bits I also liked where we have these society parties and everything, where you can have both the evil person and the nice person together in one room, and there's going to be this nice little discussion and no confrontation because of an unwritten rule of etiquette. And I really like that, because we seem to have these in these Dracula movies. I like, though, that the Countess sort of gave an altered version of the famous Hamlet quote, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamed in your philosophy." So I like that we get a little bit of Shakespeare thrown in with this. And I like that it does show that the Countess is an educated and a cultured woman as well. So I don't think that can necessarily be understated there. She's very refined, and I do like that we get this scene where they can both display their characters and what they know and their education and a little bit of background in this. So those were some of my favorite movie moments, Bob. But now's the time of our podcast where we're going to get into a little more heavier stuff with some of the discussion items, and I yield the floor to you.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, and I just wanted to kind of tie off for a second on something you said about, that we were talking about the Cockney constables. Just great. I love that. And that's humor in these movies. I don't mind humor in the movies. And even like the Cockney constables, they're fine when they have a plot thing to do. My problem, and I have the same criticism of the Bride of Frankenstein, I mean. It's that humor too early in the movie, when the first thing in the movie is funny in a horror movie. And, I don't mind horror comedies, like straight up horror comedies, but I don't mind humor in my horror movies. I think that's great, but I just like when I'm watching a classic horror, I just want it to start as a horror movie, not to start as a comedy. So that's just my kind of like distinctions as to when that ticks me off. And the thing I like here that I found really interesting is that this movie, Dracula's Daughter, begins seconds after Dracula ends, right? Van Helsing has just staked Dracula, and he's kind of in the movie Dracula, and in Dracula's Daughter, he's kind of standing up at the beginning after staking him, and I find that is really interesting. But what I really wanted to talk about is the character of Countess Zaleska and the performance of Gloria Holden, and how she's different from a lot of the other vampire villains. And I think, as far as I know, that Countess Zaleska is the first vampire that didn't want to be a vampire, which predated Barnabas Collins by 30 years. And in a lot of ways, she's a sympathetic character in some ways, even though ultimately she turns into the bad guy. Do you have any thoughts about, this kind of different approach to vampirism that would, in more modern times, it's very common, but I think this is the first. What do you think about that?
Yeah, thanks, Prof. I think it's a good point. I think a lot was asked of Holden, and I think she delivered the goods. Despite the fact she may not have wanted the role, I think she gave a fantastic and solid performance here. There were so many scenes where she was captivated by this, and Prof, I think I got a little lost in the forest through the trees, because I'm comparing Holden's performance to the charisma and sexuality that she has. It's very commanding. And when we think of like Count Dracula, this is a person that hypnotizes the victims, but there's an element of seduction here. And I'm getting off topic. with respect to your question, but I'll circle back to it though. But I was going to ask you in turn, who do you thought was the better seducer? Was it Holden as her vampire, or was it Bela as his Dracula? Because both of these characters really have that seduction level, but I'll come back to it. Prof, you bring up a good point, because I know you love Dark Shadows, and I think you really raised a good point with respect to that. This is a character that doesn't necessarily want to be the vampire to start with, but nonetheless is kind of resigned to it. And I think we could have went to a bigger area with respect to this, and the film could have explored, as if it didn't explore enough, another element with looking at this from this character. There was a sympathy, yes, to her. In fact, when she gets the arrow from a crossbow stabbed in her, that was gut-wrenching. Boy, I really felt horrified that the character met a fate such as this, despite the fact that she was the quote-unquote villain of the film. And I really was moved by that. And I really didn't hit in me until we see the character perish at the final part of this thing. And yeah, I totally get it. So Prof, yeah, let me switch it to you. Do you want to add anything more to the respect that this is a sympathetic vampire, if you will? And if you were to sort of compare and contrast the seduction level between Bela's Count Dracula and Holden's Countess, who do you think was the better seductor or seducer in these things? Or can you even put it on a scale like that?
Well, that's interesting because, I think we saw that in Dracula, Bela was talking about, to die, to be really dead, that must be glorious. And, Lucy was really turned on by that. She was like, dude, this guy is the top. Now, being a guy and being a straight guy, I do not feel like Bela is very seductive. And frankly, I'm not sure that Gloria Holden is in that way either. But I think the moment with her, when she's with Lily, the model woman, Lily is not into it. I think she at some point, realizes that something untoward is going on here, and she's kind of trying to get out of it. And I don't think that is a seduction per se. I think it's more of an intimidation attack where Lily is just too intimidated to really do anything. And, I think they show at the beginning, she's kind of gazing longingly over the bridge. And I assume that she's thinking about jumping. And that's what Sandor goes to look for when he found her, somebody that is kind of at the end of her rope anyway. And that just doesn't seem like a seduction to me as much as it's just this kind of a slow motion attack. And so I think it's funny. I think in this 1930s kind of filmmaking vibe, this whole, it doesn't seem very sexy to me. I guess I'll put it that way. Neither of them. And I don't know. Do you see that scene with Lily as more seductive than I do, Chris?
Prof, I think I do in a way. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but there's a hypnotic element, and I don't want to skirt over that as well, because Dracula uses his eyes for hypnosis, but here we have the Countess using basically a ring, which seems to induce the mesmerism, which kind of is a tool or crutch, if you will, that leads to it. Nonetheless, though, I maybe I'm reading a little too much into it, but I do have to concede, though, that there is an element of a MacGuffin type of device where a character uses something to get what they want, if you will, be it Bela's eyes or be it the Countess's ring. So I'll leave it there. But nonetheless, I thought there was a little bit of something going on there, and I'll just stop right there.
Very good. Well, what about her BFF Sandor? He's sinister, really manipulative, and he's really in a lot of ways the main bad guy in this. What do you think about his character? In my opinion, he's an underrated antagonist, and I don't understand why his image isn't more of a kind of a classic bad guy image. Good
point, Prof. And yeah, once again, I circle back to his look, and boy, how is easy is it when you're tasked to, go pick up some person on the street and bring him back here, boom, instant like that,
Yeah.
Well, I'll just go to the old bridge where these people contemplate taking their life. I'm sure I'll find a victim there. Lo and behold, yes. And we get the requisite fog, and we get the requisite hiding behind the stone pillar, and lo and behold, there he is. All along, he's doing this, and he's complying. But I can't help think, what his motivations and mechanizations for doing this are. Now, I think he's there, and I know why he's there, but just the look and just the crude and the meanness that this character has, boy, very underrated movie villain, in my opinion, Prof. And just this look. And I think people need to see when they think of the requisite quote unquote henchman. Yeah, if I'm going to put a Hall of Fame of henchmen there, I think Sandor's going to be on the first ballot Hall of Fame. There he is. He's that just that nastiness. Prof, did you have any feelings for the character? I got to give props though, because Pickle played this guy, and I hope I'm pronouncing the right, Pickle. He is just really, he owns this role. He role. He was really, really good. Prof, your thoughts and feelings of the Sandor character?
I think as good as Countess Z is, I think Sandor is even better. I think he is so obviously trying to manipulate her into staying a vampire because he himself wants to be bitten and turned into a vampire. I just think I would love to get a T-shirt made with his face on it. I think he looks fabulous. And that awful haircut. Great stuff. Great stuff. So we've talked a lot about, the obvious thing that people talk about when they talk about Dracula's daughter is the lesbianism aspect. And 1936 movie, we have here, vampirism is a curse, the curse of the Draculas. I'm never going to get over that. And in this sense, vampirism equals lesbianism equals a curse. And, this is definitely pushing the limits of the Hays Code of the time. And the thing I wanted to talk about, and I mentioned this briefly in the when we talked about Twins of Evil, and I actually got a lot of pushback from some of our audience. This movie, on the one hand, takes a moral stance, right? In this case, against vampirism, wink, wink, lesbianism. And so this is bad. And we're going to show how this thing is so bad. But also, we're going to push the more prurient aspects of it in the marketing. And Twins of Evil did that, right? Vampires are bad. This is an evil. This sexuality is an evil that we have to overcome. But guess what's in the trailer? It's all the sex stuff. And I realize we have a different culture today, whereas lesbianism and homosexuality is seen very differently than it was in 1936. And I just wanted to get some of your thoughts on, why did that work then? Does it work today in some ways? And how has the change of the culture that we're in affected the kinds of things we'll see in horror movies?
Thanks, Ralph. I think it's an excellent question. And isn't it interesting when I was doing research for this film that some people thought it was just well over the top in some regards, but some people really didn't see, quote unquote, see anything with respect to the reviews. And has the culture changed? Prof, as a little kid growing up in Memphis, the ABC affiliate wouldn't air the TV series Soap because the Billy Crystal character was gay. Right. And instead of airing Soap, they ran reruns of the 60s My Three Sons instead. Oh. And I was just so baffled by why this was. Even when I was a preteen, I couldn't fathom not showing the show. And yeah, the culture has indeed changed. And I'm taking the latter half of your question first. And I think we've really come away. Have we still got a ways to go? Absolutely. And if you're watching this, I can almost see both sides of the coin. But if you were presenting this now and they're saying, well, somebody could say that's it. I don't see it, but you can show it to somebody else and they could say, oh my gosh, can you see what they're doing?
Yeah.
Yet they're both watching the same film. And it's very, very interesting to see how we've got a couple of different reactions here. I think even in an audience today, they would see that and they go, they would definitely want more. But this was groundbreaking in such a way. And I think it's understated how groundbreaking this was back then. And I think some audiences don't quite know how big of a deal this was with respect to that then. I think the movie got away with a lot of things, even despite the fact that it almost self-censored itself. Does it work today? I think if you have a little bit of knowledge going into it and seeing what they were up against, then you know. I think you have to almost do a little bit of a study, not taking what you see at face value, but doing a little bit of background. And most horror fans do, they're curious. Oh, this film did that? I want to see what they did. Wow, look at it. But then again, if you look at it just without the knowledge and the foresight coming into it, there are things you may not miss and that may be overlooked. I think that's a very key question, though, Prof. And Prof, that's a very big question, and I hate to throw questions that you pose back to you, but I'm going to do that. Do you think this movie worked then? Does it work today? And how do you see his culture change?
Well, I think definitely our thoughts about homosexuality have changed. And I don't think necessarily that, I mean, I think I can see where somebody could watch this movie and not come away with seeing that in the movie. I remember watching the movie Fried Green Tomatoes with somebody and walked away from it, and she didn't see any homosexuality at all. And that's like, there's a lot of it in there. And, just like from watching some of those BBC British shows where, two characters were definitely gay. And then older people like my grandmother going, what? They're supposed to be gay? It's like, obviously supposed to be gay. But I think people's heads were in a different place back in the day. But I still think that we still have kind of these taboo kind of things in the culture. And I'm just thinking how, in this case, lesbianism, how it changed in the culture, kind of started throughout the 90s. And I just think that the horror movies are always kind of addressing attitudes or working with the attitudes of the audience when they're released. And I think it makes it, and that can be less impactful in another time, in another era, but still, in this case, fascinating, even though, we don't have the taboo against lesbianism now that we had 90 years ago now, when this movie was made. It's still kind of shocking to see it in a 1936 movie. But I think I still am coming back to the fact that the movie shows it as a curse, like from the screenwriter's point of view, but from the marketing director's point of view, that's what makes it into the trailer. And I'm just fascinated by this. We love it, we hate it. We love it, we hate it. We love it, we hate it. Kind of duality that the filmmakers and the marketing team of the movies play. And I just think it's such an element of business and art trying to sync up with the culture and trying to take advantage of the culture in ways that are a little sneaky. And that's a topic that just fascinates me somehow. And does that element cause this movie to be overlooked, I think, in this kind of classic Universal monster series? This is a sequel to Dracula, a direct sequel to Dracula, but released 5 years after Dracula, with only Lugosi isn't in it, but a waxwork Lugosi is in it. I don't know. Why is this movie seen less often than like Ghost of Frankenstein? Do you have any thoughts about that, Chris?
Thanks, bro. I have some thoughts, but I want to be very careful here because I don't want to be misinterpreted with what I might say here. That said, I don't mind it if somebody corrects me or can give me a differing opinion. But taking a step back, when I was doing research for this film, and then I reminded that, there was a notable such as Anne Rice, fantastic horror author, got something out of this and held it in esteem. And seeing a clip on YouTube with Quentin Tarantino talking about this and holding it in some reverence. It's almost as if this is a if you know type of thing with regarding to the film. And this is a very, very good and important movie. Now, with respect to why is it overlooked with the classic Universal monsters, this might be too simplistic of an answer, but we're talking about Dracula and multiple Dracula movies. We're talking about Frankenstein monster and multiple Frankenstein monster movies, the Wolfman and multiple Wolfman the monster movies. And when you have so many of these multiple titles and multiple appearances of Dracula, the Frankenstein monster, and the Wolfman, there's so much commercialism, and this is going on for decades, that this sort of got lost in the shuffle, and I feel terrible about that. And I think that might be too simple of an answer, but that's all I have at the moment. Prof, do you have an opinion why this movie is overlooked and not really part of the, quote, classic Universal monster lore?
It's fascinating. I think it isn't known as much because it wasn't part of that original package of creature features. And I think Universal just treated it like Ghost of Frankenstein, like some random off-brand sequel that has some Hays Code violations in it. And they just left it out of the package. And I think it was Universal's fault for not sending this around, I think, because this is a terrific movie. And it's a bit objectively, it's a better made film than even Dracula is, although it doesn't have Lugosi's hypnotizing presence. But I think that this is a real big miss from Universal's standpoint, how they treated this movie. So is this movie possible to score, Chris? What do you think?
Thank you, Prof. Yeah, boy, you really hit the nail on the head with respect to that. And I just can't but circle back to all the commercialism that those other monsters had. And now I'm thinking of how to score this.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yes. And I can't help but go back to the things I liked about it. I thought Nan Gray as Lily was totally underrated.
Yep.
We had some of the requisite, albeit cringy at moments, comedy that was in this film as well. I thought some of the film was a little uneven, but I really, really like Holden as Zaleska, and I just thought she was just perfect as that role. And there was a little bit too where she does her thing on the streets. She even goes after a guy as well as a gal in this, and I thought this was a really, really complex and great character. Sandor is magnificent. Yeah. I thought the relationship between Garth and Janet could have been a little bit better. I really wanted to root for them as a couple, and I'm trying to think, how does Kruger hold up as our requisite male hero rescuing the damsel Janet? If they had a little bit more of something there connecting on the onset, I think I would have bought a little bit more into the thing. I think Janet just brought more to the table than Garth did, and that's the way. Yet he was the esteemed director in this. I do like that this film had the element of hypnotism there, and really getting to this. I think this was something early on with respect to being onto something with this. There were a lot of nice, juicy elements to this movie. All in all, I really want to give it an A, but I think it just falls short to me. But that said, I can't deny the importance of this film, along with horror lore, but on even a broader level with respect to the sexuality and the lesbianism overtones that we have here. There was a lot of meat on the bone, if you will. Nonetheless, though, some of the spots, nothing with respect to Hilliard's direction at all, nothing with disrespect to the acting in this film, but just a little bit of how these characters played out. And I think what's holding me back is the Garth-Janet relationship dynamic. And that's just not quite making me elevate this. As much as I want to give it an A, I'm probably going to have to settle for a B, if you will. And that said, I'm kind of kicking myself, though, but it's a fine film. Nothing respect to the directions, just more or less how that relationship with Garth and Jana played out. And gosh, Jana was such a great character in this film, and I was ready for it. Yeah. So, Prof, I know you love this movie, and I will let you take the floor. I'm going to smile because I think I know where you're going to go with this, but I'm going to take a step back because I think you're going to like this much better than I do. But hopefully, you're not going to be mad at me for giving it a B. But nonetheless, okay. But I will let you take the floor, and please tell me and the listeners how you would grade this film.
Well, I can't be objective. I mean, the Universal Monster series is like the bullseye of how I was introduced to and learned to love horror movies. Now, Dracula's Daughter wasn't part of that original love of the movie. So, like, it doesn't come from nostalgia, but it's almost like a lost movie for me that was discovered as an adult, you know, and I didn't know it existed until I was an adult. It's like a cherry on the top for my love of classic Universal horror. This movie has a low running time, 71 minutes, I think, and it's pretty consistent action. There's no slow spots like in a lot of the movies of the era. So, and I think it's intriguing and fascinating and culturally important. So I have to give it an A, but I definitely recognize there are some definite issues. I think the plot is a little heavy-handed. I think the Cockney Constables, which I'm going to now use forever, they were a little annoying. And also the head of Scotland Yard. I love it. You know, here's the head of Scotland Yard. He's in charge of all of the kind of real serious crime in the United Kingdom. And he just seems to be sitting around at his desk waiting for, Garth to walk in and like chit chat. And he spends the day with him and he, goes to Transylvania with him. Whatever. Crime's crime. No big deal. But even so, I mean, there's so many tropey kind of elements to this movie, but I still sat through the 71 minutes, just loving every minute. So I've just got to give it an A because I just enjoyed it so much. So thank you for checking out Frenzy Frights. Check out our other shows, The Professor Frenzy Show, where we cover indie comics, That Guy in That Show, where we look at great character actors, and our Twilight Zone episode review, where we review Twilight Zone episodes. Thanks for listening and watching.
It's Frenzy.